The Galactic Senate, in all its arrogance, believed itself untouchable. A coalition of 100 worlds, each ruled by politicians who thought their decrees shaped the fate of the galaxy. Laws were written in cold chambers, battles were waged through proxy fleets, and power shifted with whispered deals rather than warships. It had been this way for centuries until they made a mistake that would be remembered for generations. They attacked the wrong woman. It started with a routine directive, stamped and authorized by the Senate's Defense Council. A small, unremarkable planet on the fringes of human space had been flagged for compliance enforcement. The world was resource-rich, strategically placed, but most importantly, its inhabitants had refused to bow to the Senate's authority. Negotiations had failed. Bribes were ignored. And so, the order was given: seize the planet, neutralize any resistance, and eliminate key figures who stood in the way. No one questioned it. No one objected. The target was just another human colony. A footnote in the Senate's long history of expansion. What they didn't realize, what none of them could have known, was that one of the people living on that world was not just any human. She was his wife. The first sign that something had gone terribly wrong came 3 hours after the operation began. The Senate's fleet had arrived in orbit, a show of force meant to intimidate. Their ground forces landed in full tactical formation, sweeping into the colony with the precision of a military machine. Civilians were rounded up, resistance fighters subdued. Everything was going exactly as planned. And then the ships in orbit started going dark. At first, Command thought it was a glitch. The flagship lost contact with its escort destroyers. A few moments later, the distress signals started. Muffled screams, confusion, then silence. Within minutes, the entire battle group had vanished from the fleet's tracking systems. No debris. No escape pods. Just gone. The ground forces didn't know this yet. They were too busy dealing with something far worse. The first reports were incoherent soldiers shouting, screaming, gunfire echoing through the comm channels. Then came the panicked messages. Something's in the mist, moving too fast, followed by bursts of static. The security feeds showed shadows darting between buildings, figures that didn't register on thermal scans. The elite Senate troopers, trained for planetary subjugation, were dying in the streets without even seeing what was killing them. And then a single transmission cut through the chaos, clear and cold. "You touched what was mine." The voice sent a chill through the Senate's War Council. No name, no declaration of war, just a statement of fact. By the time the Senate realized the scale of their mistake, it was too late. The colony's skies turned black as something massive descended from orbit, something that hadn't appeared on their long-range scanners. It wasn't an armada. It wasn't a fleet. It was him. He had a name, whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy. A legend. A nightmare. The kind of figure mothers warned their children about. The Baba Yaga. The one-man apocalypse. The soldier who had walked through entire wars and left nothing but ruin in his wake. The Senate had spent years pretending he was just a myth, a ghost story meant to scare young officers. But now, they had his full attention. And he wasn't here for negotiation. The final report sent from the ground forces came from a high-ranking officer, breathless and barely coherent. "We were wrong. We were so wrong. It's not an army, it's just him. And we can't stop him." Then, silence. No survivors. No explanations. The Galactic Senate had made a mistake that no amount of political maneuvering could undo. They had started a war not with a nation, not with an empire, but with a single man. And he had already decided how this story would end. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Senate found itself afraid. Not of an empire rising in defiance. Not of a rebellion sweeping through the stars. No, those were threats they understood, threats they could manage. This was different. This was personal. The man they had provoked was not a politician, not a general, not the kind of leader who rallied armies or issued declarations. He was something else entirely, something older, something the Senate had tried to forget. He had fought in wars long before they had consolidated their power. He had walked through battlefields that no longer existed, stood against enemies whose names had been erased from history. And now, he was coming for them. The Senate convened an emergency session, their grand chamber filled with the hum of whispered panic. Holoscreens displayed the last known footage from the doomed operation, grainy, flickering images of soldiers being pulled into the shadows, weapons firing wildly at something too fast to see. 100 ships had been in orbit that day. Not a single one remained. The analysts had no answers, no theories. They had all seen what happened, but none of them could explain how. "He can't be human," one of the senators finally muttered. "Not if he did this." The room fell silent, because deep down, they all knew the truth. He was human, and that's what made it worse. The Senate's Intelligence Division scrambled to piece together his history, but all they found were fragment stories buried beneath classified records, reports sealed and forgotten. Every war he had fought in, every battle he had survived, had been erased from public knowledge. As if someone, long ago, had tried to make sure his name was never spoken again. But the whispers remained. They called him the Baba Yaga, a ghost, a force of nature. And now he had a reason to come back. The Senate's chairman, an old man who had built his career on cold, calculated decisions, stared at the holographic projection of a planet, one that was now little more than an uninhabited ruin. "We need to contain this," he said. "We cannot allow a single man to threaten the stability of the Senate." The others nodded, grasping for any sense of control. They called for their fleets, for their best operatives. But deep down, they knew it wouldn't be enough. Because this wasn't about power. It wasn't about politics or territory. They had attacked his world. They had taken his wife. And now, the Baba Yaga was hunting them. The first strike came without warning. A deep space station on the outskirts of Senate-controlled space, the kind of place no one ever thought about, home to bureaucrats and logistical officers. One moment, it was transmitting routine reports. The next, it was gone. No distress signal. No explosion detected. Just silence. Then, another. A command hub on a remote moon vanished overnight. No survivors. No wreckage. Panic spread through the Senate's ranks. They deployed elite strike teams, assassins trained to deal with high-level threats. They didn't return. And with every loss, the whispers grew louder. The Baba Yaga wasn't sending a message. He wasn't demanding negotiations. He was erasing them, one by one. The Senate's fleets pulled back, reinforcing their core worlds, abandoning the outposts they had spent decades establishing. Entire sectors were left to fend for themselves. But it didn't matter, because he wasn't coming for territory. He wasn't coming to conquer. He was coming for the people who had signed the order. And the Senate knew, sooner or later, he would find them. The chairman sat alone in his chambers, staring at the last message received from one of their most secure installations. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't a warning. It was just 5 words. "You should not have touched her." And then, nothing. The chairman closed his eyes. He had spent his life making decisions from behind a desk, sending people to die with the stroke of a pen. But now, for the first time, he understood what it meant to be hunted. And he knew, no matter what they did next, no matter how far they ran, there was no escaping him. Because the Baba Yaga was already coming. The Senate's fear spread like a sickness. The first few disappearances were dismissed as anomalies, rogue attacks, internal sabotage, anything but the truth. But as the list of vanished stations and dead officials grew longer, denial became impossible. They had woken something they could not put back to sleep. The Senate's Intelligence Division worked in overdrive, tracking every move, every whisper, every shadow he left behind. But there was no pattern, no warning. He struck at will one night, taking out a fortified stronghold. The next, slipping through the defenses of a high-ranking senator's personal estate as if they weren't even there. The security footage always told the same story. Guards on high alert. Barricades reinforced. Systems locked down. Then a flicker. Lights dying for half a second. And when they came back, The room was silent. Everyone was gone. No alarms. No struggle. No bodies. Just gone. The survivors, if there were any, couldn't explain what they had seen. Some whispered that he moved faster than the eye could follow. Others swore they had heard nothing at all, just felt the presence of something watching before their comrades vanished. The Senate tried to counterattack. They sent elite hunters, assassins trained to eliminate threats before they became legends. None returned. And each time, he got closer. The chairman had stopped sleeping. He kept his guards close, his escape routes planned, but it didn't matter. Every morning, there was another name crossed off the list. Another colleague missing. Another reminder that this wasn't just a war. This was punishment. They had taken something from him. Now, he was taking everything from them. But not all of them were willing to wait for the inevitable. In a hidden chamber beneath the Senate's Capitol, a group of the most powerful leaders met in secret. They had abandoned their pride, their belief in their own invincibility. There was only one question left. How do you kill the Baba Yaga? Ideas were thrown onto the table. Orbital bombardment. Trapping him on a dead planet. Luring him into an ambush with enough firepower to reduce a fleet to dust. But nothing felt like enough. Because this wasn't a man who could be hunted like any other enemy. He was the hunt. But among them, one voice remained calm. A senator who had spent his life studying war, not from the comfort of a chamber, but from the battlefield. He had seen the Baba Yaga's work long before the Senate tried to erase it from history. He won't stop, the senator said. Not until he's taken everything from us. Not until we're all ghosts. The others looked at him, waiting for an answer. There's only one way this ends, the senator continued. We don't fight him. We don't run. We give him what he came for. The room fell silent, because they all knew what that meant. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about control. It was about her. They had taken his wife. And now, the only question left was, she's still alive. The chairman clenched his fists. If she was, it meant they had a bargaining chip. If she wasn't, then there was no deal to be made. And if there was no deal to be made, there was no future for any of them. The Senate had spent years shaping the galaxy, deciding the fate of civilizations with the stroke of a pen. But for the first time, their fate wasn't in their own hands. It belonged to the Baba Yaga. And soon, he would be standing at their door. The Senate's last line of defense had been breached. They had done everything, fortified the capital, stationed fleets in orbit, flooded every corridor with guards trained for the impossible. But none of it mattered. He had already come. The security feeds showed nothing at first. Just men at their posts, shifting nervously, weapons clutched tight. Then static. A blink of interference. When the picture returned, half of them were gone. No sound. No struggle. No explanation. The halls of the Senate's stronghold became a graveyard of whispers. Guards abandoned their positions, fleeing into the depths of the facility, but there was nowhere left to run. One by one, they vanished. The chairman sat in his private chamber, eyes locked on the holoscreen in front of him. Every locked door, every security override fell in seconds. He was here. The Senate's War Council had made their choice. If they couldn't stop him, they would try to control him. They had sent their last desperate transmission hours ago. A simple message. We have her. No response had come. But now, as the lights flickered and the heavy doors trembled under unseen force, they knew they had miscalculated. The chairman's breath came in short gasps as he turned to the others in the chamber, senators, commanders, men who had ruled the galaxy through sheer will. Now, they looked like prisoners waiting for execution. Then, a sound. Not an explosion. Not gunfire. A single footstep. Slow. Deliberate. The main doors groaned as something beyond them pressed forward. A second footstep. The lights cut out completely. Silence. Then, the doors shattered. The room plunged into chaos. Guards opened fire blindly, weapons lighting up the darkness in desperate flashes. But it was already over. One by one, their weapons fell silent. The guards themselves collapsed without a sound, dragged into the shadows by something none of them could see. The chairman clutched his chest, his breath shallow, his body trembling. Then, a voice. Low. Measured. Unshaken. Where is she? No threats. No rage. Just the weight of a promise made long before this moment. The chairman forced himself to speak. She's alive. A pause. Take me to her. The remaining senators glanced at each other, knowing there was no escape. They had tried to stand against him. They had tried to kill him. And they had failed. One of them stepped forward, hands raised in surrender, voice barely above a whisper. Follow me. The air felt heavier as they led him through the final corridor, toward the reinforced vault deep beneath the stronghold. No one spoke, because they all knew this wasn't the end. The vault door loomed ahead, thick enough to withstand orbital bombardment, reinforced with layers of energy shielding and coded access only the Senate's highest officials could override. It was their last desperate attempt at control a cage built not for his wife's protection, but for leverage. The senator guiding him hesitated before the console, fingers trembling over the input pad. The others stood behind, motionless, their fate no longer in their own hands. A moment passed, then another. The door groaned as its locks disengaged one by one, hissing open with the slow grind of heavy machinery. He stepped forward, and the moment he did, something was wrong. The air smelled off sterile, cold, like something long abandoned. The lights inside flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows across the chamber's steel walls. His wife was there, or at least someone was. She sat motionless in the center of the room, head tilted slightly downward, as if asleep. Her restraints were gone. No chains. No guards. No sign that she had fought to escape. Too easy. His pulse slowed, instincts flaring. He had waded through battlefields, torn apart entire armadas, hunted the Senate's strongest warriors in their own homes, but this felt like a trap. He took another step closer. Still, she did not move. The silence stretched. Then her eyes opened. Not wide. Not in relief. Wrong. Something cold twisted in his chest. This was his wife. He knew it was. Every detail, every memory of her was carved into his mind, and yet something was missing. Something he couldn't place. The senator took a step back. She's alive, he stammered. But there was fear in his voice. His wife's lips parted, as if about to speak. But the sound that came out was not her voice. Not human. Not right. A chill ran through him. Then she stood. Not with the cautious, aching movements of someone long imprisoned. Not with the relief of a captive finally freed. With precision. Unnatural. Fluid. As if she had never been bound at all. The silence deepened. Then she smiled. A slow, deliberate expression, foreign on the face he loved. And in that instant, he knew. The Senate hadn't just taken her. They had done something far, far worse. His breath slowed. Every instinct told him to move, to act before it was too late. But he couldn't. Not yet. She took a step toward him, that same unnatural smoothness in her movements. The sound of her boots against the metal floor echoed through the chamber. She looked like her. Sounded like her. But the moment she smiled, he knew this wasn't his wife. Not anymore. The senators had backed away completely, pressed against the walls, too afraid to breathe. They had planned for everything: his fury, his wrath, even his arrival. But not this. He forced himself to speak. What did they do to you? Her head tilted slightly, as if considering the question. Then she answered, voice soft, familiar, but layered with something beneath it. They fixed me. Fixed. The word sent a chill through him. She took another step closer, close enough that he could see her eyes clearly now. The same color. The same shape. But behind them, nothing. Not empty. Just waiting. Something inside her was watching, calculating, measuring every move he made. His fists clenched. "No," he said, his voice low. "They didn't fix you. They broke you." The smile on her lips didn't fade. But something flickered behind her gaze, something deep and buried, something his wife would have never allowed. A command. A leash. The senators had done this, not just to hurt him, but to use her against him. His mind raced. Could he undo it? Could she be freed? Or was it already too late? Then she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "They told me you'd come." His chest tightened. She took one more step, close enough now that he could feel her warmth. But there was no softness, no hesitation, no relief in her touch as she reached up and gently placed a hand against his chest. "They told me to kill you." Then she moved, faster than she ever should have. Her hand shot toward his throat, but he was already moving, ducking back as her fingers cut through the air where his neck had been. He twisted away, forcing distance between them, but she was relentless. Another strike. Another. Each one precise, efficient, nothing wasted. He barely blocked the next attack before she spun, her heel slicing through the space between them, narrowly missing his ribs. This wasn't just muscle memory. This was programming. His wife had been a fighter, but this was something else. His mind reeled. How far had they taken it? How deep had they rewritten her? The senators were silent now, frozen, as if realizing they had built something they could no longer control. She lunged again. This time, he didn't move. He caught her wrist mid-strike, his grip tight, unwavering. For a split second, there was no movement. Then, he saw it. A flicker. The briefest hesitation in her eyes, so small it would have been invisible to anyone else. But to him, it was everything. She was still there, buried beneath whatever they had done to her, behind the layers of control and commands. She was fighting. His grip on her wrist tightened. "You're stronger than this," he said. "You're stronger than them." She froze. Just for a moment. Just long enough. Then, deep within her gaze, something shifted. A crack in the programming. A hesitation in the machine. And then, the lights overhead flickered violently, a warning alarm blaring through the chamber. A new voice crackled through the room's speakers, sharp, mechanical. Override detected. Countermeasures engaged. Then the walls of the chamber began to shift. The senators gasped. The real trap had just been sprung. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about her. It was about making sure neither of them left alive. The walls groaned as panels shifted, hidden compartments sliding open. The hum of energy fields charging filled the room, a low vibration rattling through his bones. This was never just a prison. It was an execution chamber. He had seconds. His wife was still frozen in place, caught between the programming, forcing her to kill him, and the part of her fighting to break free. He saw it in the way her fingers trembled, how her breath came uneven despite the mechanical control imposed on her. He reached for her again, gripping her shoulders. "Listen to me. You can fight this." Her jaw clenched. The override command was pushing back, forcing her to move against him, but she resisted. That flicker in her eyes grew stronger. Then the energy surged. Bright blue arcs of electricity raced along the walls, forming a perimeter, a kill box designed to incinerate anything caught inside. The senators screamed, scrambling for the exit, but the doors had already sealed. They had doomed themselves the moment they thought they could control her. She gasped, staggering back as if something snapped inside her head. Her hands flew to her temples, her whole body trembling. The programming was failing. The override was breaking. He grabbed her wrist. "We have to move. Now." She looked up, and for the first time, he saw her. Truly saw her. No cold calculation. No machine's precision. Just her. The storm in her mind cleared in an instant, and then she ran with him. They moved together, faster than the collapsing chamber could react. He tore through one of the senators, ripping a keycard from his trembling grip and slamming it against the nearest panel. The override fought back, the system lagging, refusing to let them go. But it wasn't fast enough. The door hissed open, just wide enough for them to slip through before the entire room erupted in a surge of energy. The screams cut off. The Senate's last mistake had sealed their fate. They didn't stop running. Through corridors, past burning terminals, and failing security systems. The entire facility was crumbling from within. Whatever the Senate had done to her, it was tied to something bigger, something now undoing itself. By the time they reached the docking bay, alarms had fallen silent. Smoke curled through the air, and outside the station's reinforced glass, the Senate's fleet lay in ruins, torn apart by the very thing they thought they controlled. She turned to him, breathing hard. "I remember," she whispered. He met her gaze. "All of it?" Her lips pressed together. "Enough." That was all he needed to hear. The ship was waiting, engines hot, ready to take them anywhere but here. He held out a hand, and she took it without hesitation. They left the Senate's shattered remains behind, and neither of them ever looked back.